The chandeliers of Blackthorn Hall trembled that night, as though even the crystals feared the judgment to come. Beneath their trembling light, 1,000 faces shimmered, powdered, perfumed, and sharpened with gossip. The air itself seemed perfumed with anticipation, thick with champagne and envy. At the far end of the ballroom, the Duke of Blackthorn stood, carved in marble composure, his dark attire absorbing every flicker of the golden glow. It was the night his betrothal was to be announced, and London's most merciless spectators had gathered to witness the crowning of their newest Duchess. Lady Evelyn Ashcroft moved through the sea of brocade and whisper. Her gown was of pale rose silk, her gloved hand steady despite the tremor in her heart. The orchestra began the first strains of a waltz, and when the Duke approached, the world seemed to still. His voice, low and disciplined, carried through the hall. "My lords, my ladies, I am honored to present the woman I am to—" The words never found their end. A murmur rippled, thin at first, then spreading like a crack in glass. A servant, breathless and pale, had entered through the mirrored doors, bearing a folded letter sealed with crimson wax. He bowed deeply and offered it to the Duke. Such interruptions were unheard of. The guests leaned forward, scenting scandal like wolves. The Duke hesitated, then broke the seal. His eyes moved across the page once, twice, then stilled. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. He looked up, his expression unreadable, but his gaze upon Evelyn turned from devotion to disbelief. "What is this?" he said quietly, though the hall had fallen silent enough to hear the rain outside. The servant stammered something about a messenger, a gentleman claiming to have ridden all night. The Duke's voice sharpened. "Who sent this?" The servant shook his head. "It bore only your Grace's name." Then came the whispers, a rising tide, a letter, a secret, an exposure. Evelyn felt the eyes of the crowd pressing against her like a storm. "Your Grace," she said softly, stepping forward. But he stepped back. "Tell me, madam," he said, voice like ice, "did you think the truth would remain hidden forever?" She paled. "What truth?" He raised the letter aloft. "Your words, your own confession, to another man." Gasps flared like sparks. Someone dropped a fan. Someone laughed. "A letter I never wrote," Evelyn whispered. "A lie." But her voice was drowned by the low rumble of disbelief. The Duke's features tightened, pride armoring pain. "Do not insult me further," he said. "Your words here speak plainly, of passion, deceit, and longing unfit for the woman I thought I knew." She stared, eyes glistening, as he crushed the letter in his fist. "You believe this?" she asked. "You, who know my heart?" He turned away, his silence heavier than any curse. A murmur swelled. Ladies tilted their fans to conceal smirks. Gentlemen exchanged looks of cruel satisfaction. The orchestra faltered to a stop. Evelyn felt her dignity like a fragile porcelain mask about to shatter. Still, she stood tall. "If you choose to see falsehood in my name," she said, her voice trembling yet clear, "then your faith was never love, your Grace." The words struck him, but he did not answer. In the corner, the Dowager Marchioness whispered to her neighbor, "How fitting, the Duke of Blackthorn betrayed by a rose." The remark sliced through the silence like a blade. Evelyn's breath caught, but she did not weep. Instead, she turned toward the crowd that had once called her perfect. "You may all feast on rumor," she said quietly, "but remember this, guilt requires proof, and cowardice hides behind applause." A few heads turned away in shame. Most watched, fascinated, as she curtsied, perfectly gracefully, before the man who had broken her heart. Then she left the ballroom. Her steps echoed down the marble corridor, each one measured and proud, though her vision blurred with unshed tears. Outside, the storm waited like a confessor. She lifted her skirts and stepped into the rain. Behind her, the music resumed faintly, as if the world had decided to forget her already. The Duke remained at the center of the hall, unmoving. The crushed letter lay at his feet. His aide, I, the humble chronicler of this tale, dared to retrieve it. I saw the words, blurred by his grip and by the faint smear of wax. "My dearest, I cannot bear this charade. Meet me where the roses bloom, before dawn." It bore her signature, yet something in its flourish felt wrong, too heavy, too ornate. But pride is a sharper poison than doubt, and he would not listen to reason that night. Hours later, as the guests departed in murmurs and mist, the Duke stood before the mirror, his reflection fractured by candlelight. In his hand he held the engagement ring, an heirloom of black diamonds said to curse any who wore it without love. He placed it back in its velvet box and shut it with a snap that echoed through the empty hall. "So ends illusion," he whispered. "Let the world see what truth costs." Outside, the carriage carrying Lady Evelyn vanished into darkness. Within, she pressed her palm against the glass, rain mingling with tears. She thought of the letter, of a handwriting she had never seen, of betrayal born not from sin but from envy. Somewhere, someone had crafted her ruin with delicate precision, and she knew that innocence unproven is the same as guilt confessed. By morning, London spoke of nothing else. The Duke's ball had become a tragedy recounted over breakfast tables, embroidered by imagination and malice. Invitations were withdrawn from Evelyn's friends. Her family shuttered their estate in humiliation. The papers called her the fallen rose of Blackthorn. The Duke, for his part, locked himself away. He told no one what he felt, nor allowed her name to be spoken in his presence. Yet in the quiet of dawn, his valet found him seated by the dying fire, the letter unfolded once more upon his knee. He read it again and again, as though searching for mercy between the lines. None appeared. Weeks passed. The rose garden she had once tended with laughter grew wild and untamed. He ordered it uprooted. But every spring, a single pale rose returned, blooming defiantly by the marble steps. The servants whispered that her spirit had blessed it, or cursed it, no one knew which. I saw the Duke once more that season, standing by the window where rain traced silver veins upon the glass. His eyes, once so certain, seemed lost to some faraway thought. "Loyalty," he murmured, "is a virtue easily spoken, rarely proven." I wished to tell him what I suspected, that the letter was forged, that jealousy wears many faces, but pride forbade my tongue, as pride had blinded his heart. And so the night ended, not with a proposal, but with a parting, not of lovers, but of souls divided by a lie. The guests remembered the scandal, the Duke remembered her silence. Yet I remember the sound of her footsteps leaving the hall, steady against the storm, as though dignity itself were refusing to die. For that was the night the Duchess was never crowned, and the night the Duke began his reign of regret. 2 years passed, yet the scandal of that night clung to Blackthorn Hall like ivy that refused to die. The chandeliers still glimmered, but their light felt colder now, echoing across rooms emptied of laughter. The Duke moved through them like a shadow of his former self, noble in bearing, immaculate in attire, and hollow within. Pride had been his armor, but solitude had become his sentence. He had proven her guilt to the world, yet not once to his own heart. Every morning began the same. The slow turn of a key, the faint scent of dying roses, the silence of a man surrounded by memories he could not name. In the library, untouched books gathered dust upon the same page she had once read aloud. In the drawing-room, her favorite chair remained precisely where she had left it, though no one dared to sit there. Some said the Duke had buried his affection, others whispered he had buried his reason. I, who watched him closely, knew the truth. He had buried his faith. When the season returned, so too did the gossip. London is merciless in its memory. Every banquet, every opera box seemed to echo her name. Lady Evelyn, they whispered, now living quietly near the coast, perhaps as a governess, perhaps as something less respectable. No one truly knew. Rumor, like rot, spreads most easily through the sweetest fruit. The Duke attended no gatherings. Instead, he commissioned a portrait, a new image of himself to replace the one that once hung beside her unfinished likeness. The painter, an Italian by the name of Valenti, arrived one autumn evening with his brushes and his easy charm. He spoke little English, but art needs no translation. The Duke sat each day as the light faded, his expression unchanging, his eyes dark as storm water. On the third afternoon, Valenti requested a model to soften the composition, a woman's presence, to balance the austerity of the scene. Reluctantly, the Duke agreed. The housekeeper sent for a local seamstress to pose in a borrowed gown. When she entered the room, the Duke's breath caught. She was not Evelyn. And yet, in the curve of her face, in the unguarded gentleness of her eyes, there was something that awakened pain long dormant. "Who is she?" he asked quietly. "Miss Whitmore, your grace," the housekeeper replied. "A widow's daughter. She will not trouble you." But she did trouble him, for she bore resemblance enough to summon ghosts. When she turned her head, the light caught her hair in the same pale gold that once gleamed upon the ballroom floor. He dismissed her after the first sitting, but Valenti insisted. "Light needs its muse," he said with a grin. The Duke said nothing more. The portrait took months. As paint layered upon paint, the Duke began to speak again, not of society, nor of ambition, but of things unspoken. He asked Valenti how long it took for a color to dry, whether beauty could survive ruin, whether one could paint regret. The artist smiled sadly. "Regret paints itself," he said. "All we do is give it a face." In those days, the Duke walked often in the rose gardens she had once tended. Winter had claimed them, as if in loyalty to his despair. The gardeners begged to replant, but he refused. "Let them rest," he said. "Some things bloom only for the undeserving." Yet one morning, he found a single stem pushing through frost, a pale bloom against the gray. He touched it, and its thorn caught his finger, drawing blood. The wound stung more than it should have. He plucked the rose and carried it inside, setting it upon his desk beside an unopened velvet box, the ring that was never given. That night, I saw him take up the locket she had returned and hold it to the firelight. It bore her initials, E.A., engraved in delicate filigree. For years he had kept it sealed, claiming to despise it, yet never destroying it. Now, his thumb traced its edge as though it might speak. "If she were guilty," he murmured, "why does her ghost ask for mercy?" His voice trembled, though no one answered. The locket remained unopened. One evening, Valenti brought news. A nobleman from London had written, requesting to purchase the Duke's portrait once finished. "For study," he claimed. The Duke refused instantly. "No man shall own my likeness," he said, though I knew the true reason. He feared that in every brushstroke her shadow lingered. The artist departed soon after, leaving the unfinished canvas under cloth. The Duke grew restless. He began to travel, to Bath, to Edinburgh, to estates where his name was still respected though his presence was unwelcome. Each journey ended the same, a silent return, boots dusted with regret. At times he seemed almost ready to write her, but pride sealed his ink. Then came the letter. It arrived on a morning veiled in mist, delivered by a rider too weary to speak. The seal was unfamiliar, a pale crest of thorns. The Duke read it at breakfast, and for the first time in years, color drained from his face. He rose abruptly, leaving his tea untouched. When I entered moments later, the letter lay upon the table, open and trembling in the draft. I read only the first line: "If forgiveness still blooms in your heart, come to Whitestone before winter claims us both." The name signed beneath, Evelyn Ashcroft. He said nothing of it for days, though I knew the words had pierced him. I found him that night in the portrait room, gazing at the canvas still hidden under its shroud. "Do you think ghosts write letters, Thomas?" he asked. I told him no, but his eyes said otherwise. A week later, the locket was gone from his desk. The next morning, I discovered the rose, the same that had drawn his blood, pressed between the pages of his journal. Beneath it, written in his hand, "If lies built the gallows, truth must light the pyre." He had made a decision. The following dawn, he ordered the carriage prepared. I asked his destination. He only replied, "South." When I pressed further, he turned toward the window, where fog blurred the gardens into dream. "Once," he said, "I cast her from my house. Now I shall see what it is to walk the world without one." He left before noon, taking only his coat and the unopened locket. As the horses vanished into the mist, the wind carried the faintest whisper through the empty halls, or perhaps it was only my imagination, a voice, gentle and echoing, "You will find me where the roses bloom." Later that day, when I went to extinguish the candles, I noticed the painter's canvas uncovered. The Duke's image stared back, proud, haunted, unfinished. Yet beside his shoulder, almost imperceptible, The artist had brushed the faint outline of a woman's hand resting near his own, her touch eternal in pigment, unseen yet undeniable. It was not his portrait that haunted me then, it was hers, half imagined, half remembered, forever part of him. And I knew, though he had not said it, that Blackthorn Hall had seen its last winter with him inside it. For in his leaving, pride began to die, and truth, at last, began to bloom. The road to Whitestone was long, lined with bare trees that whispered secrets through the fog. The Duke travelled without crest or servant, only a single carriage and the locket hidden in his breast pocket. For days, the countryside stretched before him, endless, grey, and cold, as though the world itself waited to see whether his journey was one of penance or madness. At inns, he gave no name. To strangers, he was simply the gentleman bound south. But solitude is never silent. At night, when sleep eluded him, he unfolded scraps of parchment from a small leather satchel, unsent letters written in a hand that trembled between pride and longing. Each bore the same opening line, "My dearest Evelyn," and each ended differently, torn before the final word. They were fragments of confessions never spoken, apologies he could never allow himself to send. On the fourth night, as rain lashed against the carriage window, he read the oldest one again. The ink had faded, but the ache within it had not. "You should have been my Duchess. They said I must doubt you, but I doubted my own heart more. Forgive me not for my anger, but for my silence." He folded it with care, his breath catching as he realized he could recall the scent of her handwriting, lavender and ink, soft as spring. He had tried to forget that scent once. Now it was all that tethered him to the world. Whitestone appeared on the horizon like a secret withheld too long. The house was smaller than he imagined, weathered stone, ivy climbing the walls, a single light burning behind a shuttered window. He stepped down, the frost biting through his gloves. No servant came to greet him. Only the faint echo of a piano played somewhere within. When he entered, a woman looked up from the keys. Time had touched her gently but unmistakably. Her hair, once sunlight itself, had dimmed to silver blonde. Her figure was still graceful but lined with life's unkindness. Her eyes, the same eyes that once made a duke forget his crown, met his without fear. "Your Grace," she said softly. He hesitated. "Do not call me that." "Then what should I call you?" He exhaled. "A man 20 years too late." A silence settled between them, vast and fragile. The piano hummed faintly as if unwilling to forget the last note. She gestured toward the fire. "Sit. The night is cruel to those who travel alone." He obeyed, though his heart trembled like a sinner's prayer. They sat facing one another, two ghosts of the same ruin. "You received my letter," she said after a moment. "I did," he replied, "though I half believed it a trick of memory." "Memory rarely lies," she murmured. Her voice had changed, lower, steadier. The girl he once knew had spoken in melody. This woman spoke in truth. He wanted to tell her that she looked the same, that time had done nothing cruel that forgiveness could not mend, but words abandoned him. Instead, he removed the locket and placed it upon the table between them. She did not touch it. "I thought you would have destroyed that." "I tried," he said. "It refused to burn." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "So you kept it out of guilt?" "No," he said quietly. "Out of cowardice. To remind me of what I feared to face." She rose then, walked to a small writing desk near the window, and opened a drawer. From within, she drew a bundle of yellowed papers tied with ribbon, letters, dozens of them. She set them beside his untouched tea. "I kept these," she said. "Every one I wrote to you after you cast me out." He stared at the bundle as though it were sacred. "You never sent them." "No," she whispered, "because you would not have read them. You believed what they said, that I had betrayed you with another man. You let that lie live longer than our vows." The Duke's jaw tightened, a tremor crossing his expression. "I thought I saw proof." "You saw what you wished to see," she said gently. "The man who envied you placed that letter, that whisper, that portrait, every rumor born of malice, and you, in your pride, believed them all." Her words struck like a bell in an empty hall. He lowered his gaze, his hands unsteady. I built my life upon that lie. And when I saw it crumble, I called it justice. She turned back toward the piano, tracing the keys without pressing them. There was a time I prayed you would come for me, she said. That you would ask me, just once, if it was true. But years teach us the futility of waiting. I learned to live without being believed. He rose, crossing the small space between them. Evelyn, he said, her name breaking from his lips as if it had waited years to breathe. If you knew how I... She stopped him with a hand raised. Don't. Not yet. Let me show you something first. From beneath the letters, she drew a single sheet, the last one she had written but never sealed. Its edges were worn, its ink blurred by tears. She handed it to him. He read in silence. If ever you find this, know that I never hated you. I pitied the man who feared love more than lies. Should you one day return, come not as a duke, but as the man who once laughed without suspicion. I shall forgive you then, not because you deserve it, but because I wish to forget how much you once mattered. When he finished, his hand trembled. You forgave me before I even sought forgiveness. No, she said. I forgave the memory, not the man. Her words were not cruel, only true. And truth, after 20 years of silence, was unbearable in its mercy. They sat again, the fire snapping softly between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, with a voice that seemed carved from regret, he said, I came to confess. But now I see confession means little if one has already been erased from your forgiveness. Evelyn's gaze softened. I erased nothing. You live in every word I never sent. He reached for her hand, but she drew it gently away. Tomorrow, she said, you may tell me your confession. Tonight, let us speak only as strangers who once loved. And so they did, of gardens long gone, of dances unfinished, of music that belonged to another world. Somewhere between memory and dawn, her head bowed, and she whispered, You will leave again, won't you? He looked toward the window where the first light touched the frost. If I stay, the past will ask for too much. If I go, it will never let me rest. Her eyes glistened, but she smiled faintly. Then go. But know that every mile will only lead you back to this room. As he rose to leave, the wind pushed the shutters wide, scattering the bundle of letters across the floor, words unsent, fluttering like white birds freed from captivity. One page landed at his feet, the ink fresh though written years ago. It read simply, The truth will find you, even if love does not. He looked at her once more, wanting to speak, to stay, to undo, but the words would not come. Instead, he placed the locket upon the scattered pages and turned toward the door. When he stepped outside, the morning light fell upon him like judgment. Behind him, the piano began to play, the same song she had played the night he first refused to believe her. And for the first time in 2 decades, the Duke wept not for loss, but for the life he had finally begun to face. The winter sun hung pale above Whitestone, spilling through lace curtains in muted gold. The fire had long since dimmed, yet its ashes still breathed faint heat, a ghost of the night before. The Duke sat in silence beside it, his gloves untouched on the mantel, his eyes hollow from sleeplessness. He had not left. Not yet. Perhaps he feared that stepping outside would seal something final, something beyond forgiveness. Evelyn entered quietly, a shawl drawn around her shoulders, her expression unreadable. The light kissed the silver threads in her hair, and he thought her more beautiful than ever, not for the youth she'd lost, but for the grace she had found. You did not go, she said softly. He looked up. No. I tried to, but the road would not have me. She regarded him for a long moment. Perhaps it is not the road that refuses you, but your conscience. He smiled faintly, the gesture weary. Then it is a more merciful road than I deserve. She poured tea for them both, her movements calm, deliberate, as if pouring silence itself. When she handed him the cup, her fingers brushed his, a touch so light, yet it seemed to scorch through years of regret. What brought you back truly? She asked. Truth, he said. And the ruin I made of it. He placed the cup down untouched and drew from his coat a sealed envelope. Its wax bore his family's crest, the raven crowned in thorns. I have written what should have been said 20 years ago. But words on paper mean little now. I would rather speak them before you burn this. Evelyn took the letter, turning it between her fingers but not breaking the seal. Then speak. He stood, the morning light casting long, solemn shadows across the room. I destroyed your name, he began. I let envy, gossip, and my own pride condemn you. When I saw that portrait, that cursed imitation meant to shame, I believed what the world told me rather than what I knew of your heart. You said once that love requires courage. I had none. Her gaze softened but did not waver. And what do you seek now? Courage or absolution? Neither, he said. Only the chance to bear the weight I placed upon you. She looked away, her eyes glinting with unshed tears. You cannot bear another's years. You can only mourn what was lost to them. He stepped closer. Then let me mourn. Let me name what I have buried. The clock ticked in the stillness, steady, merciless. He fell to one knee before her, not as a duke, not as a man seeking penance from God, but as one stripped of all pride. His voice trembled. I would have made you my Duchess, Evelyn. That title was yours by right of love, not birth. Yet I denied it, denied you, to protect a name unworthy of your loyalty. I have worn that name in shame ever since. Now, I come to return what was stolen, your dignity, your truth, your place in the story they rewrote. She stared down at him, the sight almost too heavy to bear. And if the world no longer cares for that truth, then let the world be deaf, he said. I would rather speak to silence than let you remain erased. Her breath caught, a sound between disbelief and sorrow. You kneel for forgiveness, she whispered. But what if I have none left to give? He lifted his eyes to hers. Then let this moment be the grave of my pride. I kneel not for forgiveness, but because standing above you ever again would be a sin. The words hung between them like a prayer. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and steady, veiling the garden in white. She reached for his hand, the motion hesitant yet inevitable. Once, she said quietly, you accused me of deceit before all of Ravensshire. You called me a woman unworthy of honor. Do you remember the faces that watched? I remember every one, he said. And I remember the silence after. I spoke, and no one defended you. I thought justice had been served. In truth, only cruelty had. Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained composed. Then tell me, my lord, if time were kind enough to grant you that night again, what would you do differently? He did not hesitate. I would take your hand before them all. I would ask you to look upon me not as your judge, but as the man who should have trusted you more than his own eyes. And if they called me a fool, I would have worn the title gladly. She closed her eyes, the tears finally escaping. The years fell away from her face for a single fleeting instant, and she was the girl who once believed love could survive the world's disdain. I once dreamt of hearing those words, she whispered. But dreams lose their color when kept too long in the dark. He rose slowly, his hand still holding hers. Then let me give them color again, he said. Not in words, but in deed. From within his coat, he withdrew a small box. Inside lay a simple ring, silver, worn with age. It was meant for you, he said. The night before everything fell apart. I carried it even when I believed I hated you. It reminded me that my hatred was only grief that refused to die. Evelyn looked down at the ring, then at him. You would offer this now, when all that bound us has withered? He shook his head. No. I offer it not to reclaim what was lost, but to honor what endured despite me. She touched the ring, her fingers trembling. You ask me to remember love, she said. But memory is a wound, not a gift. Then let it be a wound we share, he replied softly. I have lived too long pretending mine was punishment. Perhaps it was simply unfinished. She turned away, facing the window where the snow drifted gently. If I were to accept this ring, what would it mean? "That I am no longer the Duke who condemned you," he said. "Only the man who would kneel every day of his remaining years to make amends." For a long time, she said nothing. Then, with slow grace, she took the ring from its box and placed it upon the mantel beside his gloves. "Not yet," she whispered. "Perhaps one day. But not yet." He bowed his head. "That is more mercy than I deserve." The silence stretched, fragile and complete. Then she spoke again, her tone quiet but resolute. "You may stay for supper, if you wish. The fire will not last the evening without tending." He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not distance but possibility. "I would be honored," he said. As the evening shadows lengthened, the fire caught once more, crackling to life between them. Neither spoke of forgiveness again. But when she set his cup beside hers, their reflections shimmered together in the glass. Two faces marked by time, bound by what pride had broken and love refused to bury. And though no vows were spoken, something unspoken passed between them, a peace tentative, trembling, yet real. Outside, the snow thickened, covering every trace of the past in quiet, endless white. And for the first time since that fateful night 20 years ago, the Duke no longer feared tomorrow. But from the window, unseen by either, a lone rider approached through the storm, carrying a letter that would tear open every truth they thought at last laid to rest. The storm broke with dawn. By the time the Duke reached Blackthorn Hall, his ancestral home, the once proud estate lay veiled in frost and silence. The carriages, the laughter, the orchestra that once played under chandeliers of crystal, all were ghosts now. The great iron gates creaked open at his touch, groaning as if reluctant to welcome him back. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, old perfume, and memory. He had not crossed this threshold in years. Every room seemed smaller, as if pride had inflated them once and humility had since deflated their grandeur. Portraits of ancestors glared down with painted disdain, and at the far end of the corridor, beneath the grand staircase, hung the portrait that had damned Evelyn's name, the Duchess who never was. He paused before it, the lamplight trembling against the canvas. How young she looked, how perfect! Yet now he could see the falsity, the brushstroke too deliberate, the eyes not quite hers. It was a lie that had ruled their lives. He reached out and tore the painting from the wall. The frame crashed to the marble floor, the sound echoing through the hollow house like a shot. Behind the torn canvas, an envelope fell, yellowed, sealed, hidden all these years within the frame. His breath caught. He tore it open. Inside, written in another's hand, was the letter that had once destroyed everything, a confession by Lord Bramwell, the man who had envied his title and desired Evelyn for himself. "I painted her likeness to provoke your wrath. Forgive me, though I doubt you will. My envy has ruined her, and in doing so, ruined me. If truth still has a voice, may it reach you before pride buries us all." The Duke's hand trembled. For 20 years he had borne guilt for believing the lie, yet even guilt had been shared unknowingly with another ghost of his making. He pressed the letter to his heart, the ache of revelation almost too sharp to breathe through. There was only one place the truth belonged now. He mounted his horse, the wind cutting through the grey morning, and rode for Whitestone. The journey was relentless, the snow deepening by the hour. By the time he reached the cottage, night had fallen again. Light spilled from the window, warm, living light. Inside, Evelyn stood before the fire, her hands clasped around a single candle. She turned as he entered, surprise flickering across her face, though her eyes carried no fear. "You return so soon," she said softly. "I could not stay away," he replied, his voice unsteady. "I found something that should have come to you 20 years ago." He handed her the letter. She read in silence, her expression shifting from disbelief to sorrow, then to something quieter, release. The candle's flame shuddered between them. "So," she whispered, "the man who damned me confessed at last." "Yes," he said. And in his words, I found my own sentence. She folded the letter, setting it beside the fire. "It changes nothing," she murmured. "What's lost cannot be returned." "It changes everything," he said. "Because now the truth is yours again, not theirs." For a long time, neither spoke. The storm howled outside, the windows rattling like the breath of some restless spirit. He took a step closer, the firelight catching the silver at his temples. "I have come to ask one final thing," he said. "Not forgiveness, not pity, only a moment. A single moment to rewrite what should have been." Her eyes softened. "And what moment would that be?" "The night I was to make you mine," he said. "The night I turned love into judgment. Let me give that night its ending." He extended his hand, trembling slightly. She looked at it, uncertain, then met his gaze. "You mean to dance," she said, almost smiling. "If you'll permit it," he whispered. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The years between them seemed to dissolve. He drew her near, and though no music played, the wind outside became their orchestra, the steady rhythm of forgiveness, the quiet waltz of souls long separated. They moved through the room as though time itself had paused to watch. Her gown brushed the floor, his hand rested, reverent, against the small of her back. Neither spoke. Each step was a confession, each turn a prayer. When at last the dance slowed, he looked into her eyes. "I once thought the world too cruel for such peace," he said. "And now?" she asked. "Now I see the world was never cruel," he whispered. "Only I was." She smiled then, faint, wistful, radiant. "You were young. And pride is a fever youth mistakes for strength." The fire dimmed, leaving only embers. He felt her pulse beneath his fingertips, steady, human, alive. He wanted to speak again, to promise her a future, but her expression changed, still serene, yet distant. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. "The years apart were not kind. My heart, it falters at times. The doctor says it is not long now." He froze. "No," he breathed. "No, Evelyn." "Do not look so stricken," she said gently. "Life has been long enough for regret. Let it now be long enough for peace." He fell to his knees once more, his hand clutching hers. "Then let peace find me here, with you." She touched his face, her thumb brushing away the tear that escaped his composure. "Rise, my love," she whispered, "for I would rather see you whole than kneeling before ghosts." He rose slowly, his strength trembling like a candle in the wind. "You speak as though you mean to leave tonight." "Perhaps I do," she said, "but not before one last dance." And so they danced again, slower this time, her breath shallow, her smile soft. The world outside vanished into snow and silence. When the final note of that imagined waltz ended, she leaned against him, her head resting upon his chest. He felt the warmth of her cheek, the softness of her sigh, and then stillness. He held her there, unwilling to believe. The candle flickered once, then died. The Duke stood in darkness, his arms full of all he had once cast away. Hours passed before he moved. He placed her gently upon the couch, covering her with the shawl she had worn the night before. Then he lit every candle in the house, their flames trembling in the air heavy with love and loss. At dawn, the servants who found him said the Duke was standing before the grand mirror, dressed in black, holding her locket to his heart. When they spoke, he did not answer. He merely turned to the ballroom, the great hall where they had once been promised to each other, and opened the doors wide to the morning light. There, upon the marble floor, he began to dance alone. The music existed only in memory, but his steps were sure, graceful, resolute, a man finally unburdened of pride, dancing not for the living or the dead, but for the truth that had outlived them both. As the sun rose higher, the wind carried through the open doors the faintest echo, laughter, soft and distant, like silk brushing against eternity. And when the servants entered again, the Duke was gone. Only 2 footprints remained in the dust where they had danced, one heavier, one light, and upon the mantel the ring gleamed in the morning sun. It was said thereafter that, on winter nights, music could still be heard from Blackthorn Hall, a waltz played for no one, by lovers who had finally found their peace.